My name is Henry McCarthy, and I was standing in my daughter's hallway with a bag of groceries in one hand when she told me I'd need to check in through an app before I could stay. $250 a night, plus cleaning fees, for my own daughter's house, the one I helped her buy. I thought it was a bad joke until I saw she was serious. That moment changed everything between us. If you've ever felt taken for granted by family, you'll understand. Tell me where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and let's get started. I was still standing in my daughter's entryway, suitcase by my side, when she said it. Dad, before you get comfortable, I'll need to run your card. At first, I thought I'd misheard her. I'd just driven 40 minutes through Louisville traffic in the cold March rain, carrying a bag of groceries for the dinner I'd planned to cook us. Her words didn't match the warmth I'd imagined. My card? I asked. Claire smiled like she was smoothing over a misunderstanding. It's just the way we do things now. We use an app. It keeps track of stays. Stays. The word landed wrong. From the kitchen, Mason's voice floated in, casual as if he were talking about a gym membership. Yeah, Henry. It's just easier for housekeeping that way. Housekeeping. I looked at the staircase I'd helped them rebuild. Oak rails I'd sanded in my own garage until my fingers cramped. Now it gleamed like it belonged to strangers. I'm not here for a stay, I said slowly. You invited me. Claire's tone softened, as if explaining to a customer why a coupon couldn't be honored. Of course you're welcome. But this way, we can cover expenses fairly. Utilities, cleaning, little things like that. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. I glanced down at the bag of russet potatoes and rye bread at my feet. Tonight, I'd planned to make the same stew she used to request on her birthday. I'd pictured us at the table I refinished for them, steam curling from the bowls, laughter in the air. But now, I was staring at my own daughter, who was telling me I could be here, so long as I paid for the privilege. How much? I asked, though my voice already sounded tired. Mason appeared in the doorway, grinning like this was all perfectly normal. $250 a night, plus the cleaning fee. We'll refund your deposit, of course. I let out a short, humorless laugh. A deposit? To see my own daughter? It's policy, Claire said quietly, like it was out of her hands. My phone buzzed with a link she'd just sent. The app loaded, McCarthy stay, 2 nights, $250 night, see $85 cleaning, plus $200 deposit. At the bottom, a cheerful note. We love hosting family. My chest felt tight. This was the same daughter who once cried into my shoulder the day Mason proposed, because she wished her mother was still alive to see it. The same girl whose first car I bought, whose wedding I paid for, whose down payment I handed over without a single question. Back then, she told me, Dad, you'll always have a place here. Always, it seemed, had an expiration date. I should have walked out right then. But instead, I pulled out my wallet and stared at the card in my hand. My thumb hovered over the numbers, like I was signing away something more than money. Thank you for understanding, Claire said, as the payment went through. She showed me to a small room with a daybed, fresh towels rolled tight, and a sign on the dresser that read, Be Our Guest. Next to it, a Wi-Fi code labeled Conway House Guest. I stood there for a moment, staring at that sign. Guest, not father, not family, just a man passing through. Down the hall, I heard Mason reminding her about quiet hours and housekeeping at 9. Every word made the walls feel tighter. By the next morning, I was gone. 2 hours before checkout. I didn't bother with the stew. I didn't say goodbye, beyond a polite nod. I just rolled my suitcase across the porch I'd built with my own hands, feeling the boards hold my weight one last time. And as I reached my truck, one question cut through the cold Louisville air, sharper than anything they'd said. When did my daughter stop seeing me as her father and start seeing me as a bill? That was the morning I decided this wouldn't stand. And if you want to understand how we got here, we have to go back. Back to the days before invoices, apps, and quiet hours, to when love wasn't something you charged for. When Claire was born, she came into this world with a stubborn cry and a grip so tight around my finger that the nurse laughed. "This one's not letting go of you," she said. And for years, she didn't. I was 30 when her mother, Diane, passed away. Breast cancer, the kind that doesn't wait for you to catch your breath. Claire was only 12. We stood together in our small kitchen after the funeral, both of us wearing the same black we'd never wear again. And I promised her I'd do both jobs, father and mother. She nodded, eyes wide, as if she believed I could actually pull that off. From then on, my life was a calendar built around her needs. I turned down promotions that would have taken me on the road, because I didn't want her eating microwaved dinners alone. I learned to braid hair from YouTube videos in 2006, back when the internet still made you wait for everything. I packed lunches with little notes, just like Diane used to do, because I didn't want her to forget what it felt like to open something made with love. Money was always tight, but I made sure she never saw that. I worked overtime at the plant fixing machinery with my hands until they cracked, because I wanted her to walk into school wearing new shoes, not the scuffed ones from the thrift store. I sold my motorcycle the year she started college, so she wouldn't have to take out another loan. She cried when I told her, but I told her not to worry. It was just a machine. "You're the only thing I can't replace," I said. When Mason came into the picture, I tried to be open-minded. He was all confidence and quick smiles, the kind of man who could sell you your own jacket back to you. At first, I thought he was just young and ambitious. He called me sir for the first year, which I told him was unnecessary. But he kept doing it, though over time it started sounding less like respect and more like formality. The red flags came slow, quiet, like weeds you don't notice until they've wound around the fence. The first was at their wedding. I'd paid for the venue, the catering, even the live band Claire had dreamed of. The night before, during the rehearsal dinner, Mason pulled me aside and thanked me for fronting the costs. Fronting, as though I was a bank loan they'd repay when convenient. Then there was the house. They found a 3-bedroom in a good part of Louisville, too good for their budget. I knew they'd never get it without help, so I signed the check for the down payment, on the condition that they didn't need to pay me back. "You've done enough," Claire said, hugging me. "This is your home, too." Those were her exact words. But over time, the warmth in that promise cooled. My visits started needing a little heads up, then a few days' notice, and eventually "we'll have to check the schedule." Goddard's one Thanksgiving, I arrived with 2 pies and a bottle of bourbon, only to be told, at the door, that they'd gone ahead and made other plans, because Mason's parents had booked the dining room at the club. They invited me to join, but it was too late to get me on the guest list. I ended up eating alone at a diner that night, watching football on the TV over the counter while the waitress topped off my coffee out of pity. Still, I brushed these things off. Families change, I told myself. Young couples have their own lives. I didn't want to be the father who clung too tight, but Mason had a way of making me feel like I was taking up space, even when I wasn't. If I came over to help with a repair, he'd hover, offering suggestions, like he was the one teaching me how to change out a faucet. Once, while I was on my knees fixing a baseboard, he made a joke, loud enough for Claire to hear, about how handyman work is great when you've got more time than money. Claire laughed, though her eyes darted to me like she realized too late what it sounded like. It wasn't just Mason. I started noticing changes in Claire, too. She began speaking in phrases I'd never heard from her before. Boundaries, cost-sharing, maintaining equity. She told me once, when I suggested coming by for the weekend, that we've just got to keep things balanced for everyone's comfort. Comfort. I didn't realize until later that comfort was starting to mean theirs, not mine. The shift became clearer after their daughter Tessa was born. I thought being a grandfather would open the door again. In the first few months, it did. I was over there constantly, rocking her to sleep, fixing the shelves in the nursery, stocking their fridge when they were too tired to shop. But then came the comments. "We'll let you know when's a good time for a visit. The baby's on a schedule, Dad. We can't have surprise drop-ins." Once, I offered to babysit so they could have a night out. Claire hesitated. "It's just, you're not up to date on the new safety stuff." New safety stuff? I'd raised her. But now I wasn't qualified to watch my own granddaughter without supervision. The humiliations were small, but they stuck like splinters. One Sunday afternoon, I stopped by unannounced with a set of vintage picture books I'd found for Tessa. I could hear them talking inside, but no one came to the door. Later, Claire texted that it wasn't a good time, and they'd catch up soon. The books stayed in the back seat of my truck for weeks before I gave them to the library. Then there was the money talk. Not long after, Mason invited me over for a chat. He'd drawn up a spreadsheet. Expenses, projections, household contributions. My name was in a column labeled External Support. He explained with a straight face that while my past help had been generous, they needed to transition into a more sustainable model. I sat there, staring at my name on that paper, realizing my role in their life had been reduced to a budget line item. But I swallowed my pride. I kept showing up. I kept fixing things when they asked. I told myself I was doing it for Claire, for Tessa, for the memory of Diane. The last red flag before everything tipped was so small, most people would have missed it. I'd been over one Saturday, fixing a cabinet door. Claire offered me coffee, but instead of pouring it into one of the old mugs I'd given her, she handed it to me in a travel cup, lid on, like she expected me to take it to go. I sat there, cup in hand, watching her bustle around the kitchen that I'd tiled with my own hands, and it hit me. She was already making sure I didn't get too comfortable. I didn't say anything that day, but in my gut, I knew. Something in our balance had shifted for good. And the next time I came over, it wouldn't just be coffee in a paper cup. It was early June, the kind of Kentucky morning where the air already sticks to your skin before the sun clears the rooftops. Claire had asked if I could come by and help replace the rotting boards on the back deck. Before the baby's birthday party, she'd said. I loaded my truck with tools, a box of screws, and 2 gallons of stain, happy to be useful. When I pulled into the driveway, there were more cars than usual. Mason's black SUV, Claire's sedan, and a couple of others I didn't recognize. I figured maybe friends had come to help, but as soon as I stepped out, I caught the sound of voices drifting from the backyard. Not just voices, laughter, the kind that has an edge to it, like people sharing a joke they don't want you to hear. I rounded the corner of the house, toolbox in hand, and stopped cold. Claire was standing near the deck with Mason, a man in a blue polo holding a clipboard, and a woman in a crisp skirt suit. The boards I'd planned to replace were already half gone, a neat pile stacked to one side. But it wasn't the missing deck that made my stomach sink. It was the big vinyl banner strung between 2 poles. Welcome, summer guests! Beneath it, on a folding table, sat a sign-in sheet, stacks of glossy brochures, and, God help me, the same app Claire had made me use in March, now displayed on a tablet, with a cheerful, "Book your stay here." "Dad, you're early!" Claire's smile was bright but tight, like she'd been caught before she'd finished setting the stage. "What's all this?" I asked. Mason stepped forward, his voice dripping with that faux warmth he used when delivering bad news. "We're converting the property into a part-time vacation rental. Great location. Perfect for events. It's going to be a solid income stream." I stared at him. "Your home?" The one I caught myself before finishing the sentence. Claire jumped in. "We've been meaning to talk to you about this. You're our first booking for the weekend. Kind of a trial run." "Booking?" I felt heat crawling up my neck. The woman in the skirt suit looked at me like I was another item to check off her clipboard. "Mr. McCarthy, we just need your signature on this waiver. Standard liability for guests." "Guests?" I repeated. The man in the blue polo chuckled. "Hey, you'll love it. Great rates for friends and family. And you get early check-in, no extra charge. I didn't move. My toolbox felt heavy in my hand. I came to fix the deck for my granddaughter's party. Claire shifted uncomfortably. About that, we've moved the party to Mason's parents' house. It's just easier since we're hosting paying guests here this weekend. The words hit like a gut punch. So I'm not invited? She hesitated. Mason filled the silence. It's nothing personal. We just have to prioritize our commitments. You understand, business. I looked around at the backyard I'd mowed 100 times, the fence I'd patched after every storm. In the corner, the sandbox I'd built for Tessa sat half-filled, toys scattered like they'd been abandoned mid-play. Claire's voice went softer, almost pleading. Dad, you can still come over next week. We'll make time. Behind her, one of the strangers, a young couple holding iced coffees, walked up from the driveway, glancing around with the eager eyes of people seeing a property they might rent. The woman smiled politely at me before turning to Claire. We're so excited to stay here. Love the family vibe. Family vibe. Claire lit up for them in a way she hadn't for me in months. We're so glad you're here early. Let me show you around. She gestured for Mason to take over with the clipboard, then swept inside with her new guests, her voice warm and practiced. I stood there, useless, while Mason started explaining the amenities, the smart thermostat, the freshly painted guest rooms, the new deck boards scheduled for delivery. Every improvement I'd been asked to do, every repair I'd volunteered for, now part of a sales pitch. Then Mason turned to me, lowering his voice like he was offering me a kindness. Henry, I hate to bring this up, but since we're in business mode this weekend, we'll need to go through the app for your stay. Just 2 nights? Then we've got another booking Monday. I clenched my jaw. I'm not staying. His eyebrows lifted in mock surprise. Oh, well, in that case, could I ask you to clear your tools off the deck? The photographer's coming in an hour, and we need clean shots for the listing. The couple laughed at something Claire said inside. I realized they'd probably never know I was her father. To them, I was just the hired help lingering too long. I carried my toolbox back to the truck, each step heavier than the last. My hands shook as I set it down in the bed. I told myself I'd just drive away. But when I turned, I caught sight of the living room through the open sliding door. Claire was pointing to the refinished dining table I'd sanded for 3 weekends straight. Custom craftsmanship, she was saying to the couple. One of a kind. No mention of me. Not even a vague, my dad made that. The man nodded appreciatively, already picturing himself sitting there with a drink that wasn't mine. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not loud, not shattering, but a slow, splintering break. The kind you only notice when you try to breathe deep and can't. The woman in the skirt suit came out with a stack of printed contracts. Mr. McCarthy, if you could sign this non-compete clause, we'd appreciate it. Just says you won't solicit or interfere with our guest list. My voice came out hoarse. I'm not signing anything. She frowned like I was being unreasonable. It's standard. Not for family, I said. She gave a little shrug and turned back inside, muttering something under her breath. I stayed on the porch for a long minute, watching shadows shift across the boards. My knees ached, my palms were slick, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this irrelevant. Claire reappeared, her face carefully composed. Dad, maybe it's best if we give each other some space. I'll call you next week, okay? I looked at her, my little girl in a tailored blouse, hair perfectly pinned, speaking to me like I was an inconvenient guest, overstaying my welcome. I wanted to say 100 things. I wanted to ask her when she'd stopped being my daughter and started being Mason's business partner. I wanted to remind her of nights I sat up with her through fevers, the bills I paid without blinking, the promises she made. Instead, I just nodded, because in that moment, I understood something. Whatever I said right now would vanish into the same air that carried her sales pitch. I walked back to my truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, The banner still flapped cheerfully in the breeze. Welcome, summer guests. By the time I hit the main road, my face felt calm, my hands steady on the wheel. Inside, though, there was a weight settling. Not sadness, not anger, but something colder, denser, something that didn't need words yet. I drove on, letting it take shape in the quiet. For a few days after the summer guests debacle, I didn't answer Claire's calls, not because I wanted to make a point, but because there wasn't anything left to say that wouldn't sound like begging for the kind of relationship she'd already sold off. Instead, I started cleaning out my garage. I'd been meaning to do it for years, but now I had a different purpose. The shelves were lined with folders, receipts, and old coffee cans filled with screws and nails sorted by size. And in the corner, behind a covered workbench, sat a dented metal filing cabinet I hadn't opened in a decade. When I tugged the drawer open, the smell of paper and dust came up like a ghost from the past. Inside were the files from when I co-signed their mortgage, copies of every check I'd written for renovations, invoices from the contractors I'd hired, and, most importantly, the original purchase paperwork. Back then, I'd insisted on holding onto my copy, just in case, even though Mason had joked about me being paranoid. I sat at my workbench, flipping through the documents slowly, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm. That's when I saw it. The contract for the down payment loan I'd given them. It wasn't a gift on paper. It was a loan with no repayment schedule. Just my signature and theirs, witnessed by my neighbor, Frank. I'd drawn it up back then at the advice of a buddy who'd been burned by lending family money. I'd filed it away and never mentioned it again. They'd probably forgotten it existed. I picked up the phone and called Frank. "You still have your notary stamp?" "Sure do," he said. "What's cooking?" "Nothing yet," I said. "Just checking." That afternoon, I drove to the county clerk's office. I didn't file anything, not yet. Instead, I requested a few public records. One of them was the deed to Claire and Mason's house. I wanted to see exactly how much equity they'd built, how much they stood to lose, if anything, disrupted their plans. On the way home, I stopped at the diner on Bardstown, the same one where I'd eaten alone on that long-ago Thanksgiving. Ruby, the waitress, still remembered me. "Haven't seen you in a while," she said, pouring me coffee. "I've been busy," I told her. And it was true, only now the work was a different kind. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out the app Claire had made me use for booking stays. I noticed something curious. They were listed not just as a host, but as part of a larger premium partner network, which meant they relied on reviews. A bad enough rating from a verified stay could knock them down in search results, especially if it mentioned safety or cleanliness. I didn't leave a scathing review. Not yet. I just submitted a politely worded, slightly cool comment about inconsistent communication and unexpected fees. Enough to make other potential guests think twice, but subtle enough that Claire and Mason would chalk it up to a picky stranger. Still, I knew I needed to rattle them more directly. A week later, I called Mason. "Heard you've been doing well with the rental," I said casually. He was caught off guard. Probably thought I was calling to apologize. "Yeah, it's going great. Booked through the summer." "That's good," I said. "You know, I was going through my files and found the original down payment loan paperwork, the one you and Claire signed. I'll send you a copy. Might want to refresh your memory." There was a pause. "Loan paperwork?" I thought. "I know what you thought," I said, letting the silence hang. "But things change. Business is business, right?" He tried to laugh, but it came out tight. "Yeah, of course." I emailed the scanned copy within the hour. 2 days later, Claire called. "Dad, Mason says you sent him some paperwork about the down payment. You're not actually going to—" "I haven't done anything," I said calmly. "Just keeping my records in order. You never know when they might come in handy." I could hear her swallow on the other end. "Right. Well, thanks for letting us know." The seed was planted. Over the next week, I made a few more quiet moves. I canceled the quarterly pest control service that had been under my name since they moved in. Same with the landscaping contract I'd been paying for, without them knowing. Within 10 days, the grass out front was knee-high, and the deck had fresh wasp nests forming under the rails. Not enough to cause real damage, just enough to make them scramble before their next guests arrive. When Claire texted me a photo of the overgrown yard with a question mark, I replied, "Oh, I figured you'd taken over by now. Boundaries, remember?" The best part was knowing they couldn't get mad without admitting just how much they'd been leaning on me all this time. The first real crack showed during a Saturday farmer's market. I ran into one of Claire's friends, a woman named Jenna, who'd been at her baby shower. She mentioned she'd been trying to book the house for her in-laws, but couldn't find it listed anymore. I just smiled. That's strange. By Monday, Claire called again, her tone clipped. "Dad, did you do something to our listing?" "No," I said truthfully. I hadn't touched the listing. I'd just asked Ruby's nephew, who worked for a local paper, to run a little community spotlight feature on the sudden rise of short-term rentals in our neighborhood, with a focus on how neighbors were pushing for tighter regulation. The article didn't name them, but the accompanying photo showed a row of houses, and theirs was in the background. Bookings slowed. I could tell because Mason started posting on Facebook about last-minute deals and flexible rates. Through it all, I stayed polite, helpful even. I dropped off a set of tools Mason had once borrowed and forgotten to return. I waved at them in the grocery store. I asked about Tessa and listened without bitterness, but every move I made was deliberate. I didn't need to shout, accuse, or demand. All I needed was to remind them, in ways too subtle to defend against, that I wasn't the irrelevant old man they thought they'd sidelined. I had leverage, I had memory, and I had patience. One night, as I sat on my porch, watching the sun drop behind the trees, I thought about Diane. She'd hated conflict, but she'd understood the quiet power of persistence. "A river doesn't cut through rock because it's angry," she used to say. "It's because it never stops." That's when I realized I wasn't done. I wasn't anywhere close to done. And that's when I remembered I still had something left. The slowdown in their bookings must have hit harder than I realized, because one Tuesday afternoon, I got a text from Claire. "Hey, Dad, can we talk? It's important." I ignored it for an hour. Then another came. "We need to clear the air. Mason will be there too." That second line told me everything. This wasn't an apology. This was a meeting. When I arrived, their house looked different. Not cleaner, not messier, just staged. The coffee table had a neat folder on it, and Mason was already sitting forward in the chair, his laptop open like a courtroom exhibit. Claire stood behind him, arms crossed, the smile she wore at her baby shower replaced with something tighter. "Thanks for coming, Henry," Mason began, voice coated in false civility. "We've been reviewing some things, and there are misunderstandings we should fix." "Misunderstandings," I repeated, taking the seat opposite them. Claire leaned in. "About the down payment loan, Mason spoke to a lawyer friend, and it turns out, unless you file within a certain period, it's unenforceable, which means, Mason cut in, you can't just pop up after all these years and demand repayment. Legally speaking." I let the words hang, studying their faces. Mason's smirk had the confidence of a man who thought he'd landed the final punch. Then he slid a piece of paper across the table, a mutual release agreement. It stated that I acknowledged the loan as a gift, forfeiting any right to claim repayment in the future. At the bottom, 2 lines waited for signature. "Sign it," Mason said, "and we can all move forward." Claire added, "We just want to make sure there's no tension. For Tessa's sake." That last part was the hook, using my granddaughter's name like a shield. I picked up the pen, turned it between my fingers, and set it down again. "You spoke to one lawyer," I said. "I spoke to 3. Mason's smirk twitched. "Turns out," I continued, The limitation period doesn't apply to loans with no set repayment date. Unless both parties agree, it's a gift. And seeing as I've got your signatures on a loan document and Frank's notary stamp, well, I let the thought trail off. Claire's arms uncrossed. Dad, we're just trying to avoid a mess. Mess? I said quietly. That's interesting, because I was under the impression you liked mess, so long as you can charge someone for cleaning it up. Mason's jaw tightened. Look, we're offering to make this simple, but if you want to go down the legal road, fine. We'll have to dig into everything, including that little arrangement you had with the pest control and landscaping. Wouldn't want people thinking you were interfering with our business. Gaslighting, turning my quiet withdrawals of help into something malicious. I leaned back, feigning thoughtfulness. Funny you should mention business, because I was going through some old paperwork last week, and I came across a deed. My name's on it. The deed to the cabin in Shelby County. Claire blinked. The what? Mason frowned. You sold that years ago. I smiled. No, I transferred it into a trust. The trust is in Tessa's name, and wouldn't you know it? It's zoned residential and short-term rental friendly, lakeside property. Secluded. Great reviews from the fishing crowd back when I rented it out in the summers. I could see the wheels turning in Mason's head. A competing rental, owned by their own daughter's trust, controlled by me. No way to stop it without looking like they were sabotaging their child's future. That's not relevant, Mason said, but his voice had lost some of its steel. Maybe not to you, I said, but to potential guests, to neighbors already sick of short-term rentals in this area, to the city council members I play poker with every other Thursday. It might be very relevant. Claire's face paled. She knew what I was saying without me saying it. I could siphon their bookings without ever touching their property. I let the silence stretch, then leaned forward. By the way, I recorded this conversation, just in case any misunderstandings come up later. You know how memories can be tricky? Mason's laptop snapped shut. Are you threatening us? No, I said simply. I'm protecting myself. And my family. The word family seemed to hang in the air a second too long. Claire finally spoke, softer this time. Dad, why are you doing this? We're just trying to make a life here. I looked at her. Really looked. The girl who once hugged me so tight after scraping her knee that my shirt stayed damp with her tears. The woman who now thought the best way to protect her life was to put me on the other side of a contract. I know, I said. I'm just making sure you remember who helped you start it. We sat there, the three of us in a living room that suddenly felt smaller than my own porch. No one moved. No one blinked. And in that stillness, I could see it. The first flicker of doubt in their eyes. The realization that the old man they thought they could sideline had cards they hadn't counted on. I stood, slid the unsigned release back toward Mason, and picked up my coat. You haven't seen anything yet, I said. Then I walked out, leaving them to stare at the space I'd just vacated, the way you stare at a door you're not sure is closed for good. 2 weeks after that tense meeting, I got an invitation, or rather, a summons wrapped in a smile. Claire called to tell me Mason's parents were hosting a family appreciation brunch. We'd really like you to come, Dad, she said, her tone too smooth to be casual. It's time to clear the air. I knew better. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a stage. The country club's dining room was all polished wood, and sunlight streaming through tall windows. Long tables were set with fine china, the smell of coffee and baked ham hanging in the air. Mason's parents sat at the head, Claire beside them, all wearing the smug expressions of people about to unveil something they thought would end the conversation for good. I took a seat halfway down the table. Opposite a cousin I barely saw any. The chatter quieted when Mason stood, champagne glass in hand. We're so glad everyone could be here, he began, his voice carrying easily. Claire and I have been working hard to build something for our family's future, and we're excited to share it with you all today. He gestured toward a large easel with a printed copy of a document, a mutual release agreement. My name was printed neatly in the middle. As many of you know, there's been some confusion about past financial help Mason continued, "We've decided to put it behind us. Henry has agreed to sign this document, releasing any claim over our property or assets, so we can move forward without tension." Claire looked right at me, smiling as if to say, "See? We're ending this on our terms." A murmur of polite approval ran down the table. Mason set the paper in front of me along with a pen. "Go ahead, Henry," he said lightly. "Let's make it official." I looked down at the paper, then up at the dozen pairs of eyes watching. I could have made a scene, raised my voice, called them liars, but I didn't. Instead, I reached into my leather folder and pulled out a different document. "Before I sign anything," I said, "I'd like to share something of my own." I stood, unfolding the paper slowly. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the deed to the Shelby County cabin, in Tessa's name, through a trust I control. I've decided to make it available for short-term rentals again. All profits go into her college fund." A ripple moved through the room. Mason's parents stiffened. Claire's smile faltered. "But there's more," I continued. "I've also partnered with a few local property owners to create a private rental network. It's small now, but it's exclusive. And wouldn't you know it, one of the first listings is in a neighborhood that's, let's just say, competitive." I let the implication hang. Their bookings would dry up without me ever touching their house. Mason's jaw worked, but I wasn't done. I pulled out my phone and tapped a button. "And this," I said, "is a recording of our last conversation, the one where you suggested I sign away my legal rights under pressure. I've sent copies to my lawyer, the city's rental compliance board, and a few other folks who care about how business is conducted in this town." Now the room was silent, except for the faint clink of a coffee cup being set down. Claire's voice broke the quiet. "Dad, why are you doing this here?" I met her eyes. "Because here, everyone gets to see the truth. You tried to turn me into a bill. You tried to make me sign away what I earned, what I built, what I gave freely. And now, everyone at this table knows who you've become to do it." Mason's father shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," I said, my voice calm but carrying. "Because you made my worth a public matter the moment you tried to parade my surrender in front of family." Claire's eyes glossed with something between anger and shame. Mason stared at the table. I slid the unsigned release back across the linen tablecloth. "I won't be signing this. Not today. Not ever." No one spoke. Even the servers seemed to move slower, like the room itself was holding its breath. Finally, I leaned down just enough for only Claire and Mason to hear. "You haven't seen anything yet." Then, I set my folder under my arm, straightened my jacket, and walked out of the dining room without looking back. The silence followed me all the way to the parking lot, the kind that tells you the message landed exactly where it needed to. In the weeks after the brunch, I didn't hear from Claire or Mason. Not a call, not a text, but I heard plenty from other people. Ruby at the diner told me she'd overheard a couple talking about a big dust-up at the club. My neighbor Frank mentioned Mason had been seen taking meetings at a coffee shop instead of home. Something about the city holding up their permits. And Jenna, Claire's friend, said she'd tried again to book their place for her in-laws, but found the listing gone completely. The cabin in Shelby County, on the other hand, was booked solid. Every weekend was taken through autumn. I visited once, just to walk the property. The lake shimmered in the afternoon sun, and I imagined Tessa running along the dock someday, her college fund growing with every guest that stayed there. I never told Claire I'd made her daughter the beneficiary. That was between me and the trust. But I knew, sooner or later, she'd have to reckon with the fact that the only steady asset tied to her child's future was something I'd protected, not her. The real consequence, though, wasn't financial. It was quieter, sharper. Word got around about how they'd treated me. Mason's parents, who'd once been so quick to side with their son, kept a polite but noticeable distance. Invitations slowed. The smiles they'd flash in public no longer reached their eyes. I wasn't looking to ruin them, just to remind them that respect isn't optional, and that even a man you think you've sidelined can still change the room you're in. One Saturday, I was in my garage when I heard a small voice behind me. "Grandpa?" I turned. Tessa stood there, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Claire was by the driveway, looking like she wasn't sure whether to come closer or turn back. "I wanted to see the lake house," Tessa said. I crouched down. "It's yours, you know. One day, but for now, we'll go together, and I'll teach you to fish." Claire's eyes met mine briefly, and for the first time in months, there was no defense in them, just something softer. Maybe guilt, maybe understanding. I didn't press it. Some lessons take years to sink in. After they left, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The air was warm, the cicadas humming in the trees. I thought about that first day in March, standing in Claire's hallway, groceries at my feet, listening to her tell me about policy. Back then, it had felt like a door slamming shut. Now, I understood something different. Doors close all the time. But there's always another way out. Through a side gate, across the yard, down the road you've been walking your whole life. You can't make people value you. You can only value yourself enough to walk away when they don't. Respect, I've learned, is a kind of currency. Once you spend it all on someone who won't give it back, you're broke in more ways than money can fix. But keep it, guard it, and you'll never run out of ways to live in peace. Karma doesn't always show up in grand gestures. Sometimes it's just a quiet shift, a slow turning of the tide. And if you're patient, you get to watch the people who underestimated you realize they were standing in the shallows the whole time. As for me, I've got work to do. A cabin to keep up, a granddaughter to teach, and a life that feels a little lighter now that I'm not waiting for an invitation that comes with a price tag. And if Claire ever decides to knock on my door without an app or a deposit request, well, I'll decide then if I'm home. Thank you for spending this time with me and hearing my story. If something in it reminded you of your own life, I'd like to hear about it. Share your thoughts or experiences down in the comments. Your words might be what someone else needs to hear today. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge with Jonah, so you'll be here for the next one. Every view, every comment, every click helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, take care of yourself and never forget your own worth.